Welcome to No Room for Phonies. We're back.
Hi.
Charles, Pam, and we are talking about personalization in education through differentiation. That's a big mouthful.
Is this episode 7 of the education series?
It's episode 8?
8 of 10?
Of 10.
Okay.
Right?
Episode 8 of 10.
There's 2 more.
But this is episode 50 of the podcast.
No, 49.
49.
I'm pretty sure it's 49.
All right.
I don't know.
It'll all be in the show notes.
It's some number of the education series and some number of the entire podcast. But anyway, it's a new episode. But first of all, we tried the August Frankie, the Frangelico Kahlua Irish cream,
hazelnut topping.
Hazelnuts. It was very good. It was very good. It's dessert though, so don't be thinking. Yeah, sure. We haven't tried the full moon yet. Kahlua, white rum, and coffee, and so we were trying to find a time.
Full moon, that would be for sure.
Yeah. But we are excited about October.
Yes.
Which is buttered rum. So 4 teaspoons of sugar, a cup of rum, 2 cups of boiling water, and 2 teaspoons of unsalted butter.
That sounds good.
That sounds very good. So I'm pretty sure we'll be trying.
That reminds me of that syrup or whatever you make for the Christmas pudding.
Yes. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure we'll be trying that. Plus, we will be making Christmas pudding. I already have that on my list of things to do.
Are we steaming a pudding this year?
Yeah. Not steaming. Not Christmas pudding. Christmas cake. But we could make Christmas pudding.
We did once, right?
We did that once.
Even a gluten-free one, I think we tried.
We did, yeah. And then my book recommendation this month is the Indian not the Indian, but Indian in the Cabinet, Speaking Truth to Power. It's the Jody Wilson-Raybould book.
Awesome.
And I listened to it on Audible, and I would highly recommend that.
Very
it was
so. Captures a lot more of the emotion in her voice.
Mm-hmm. And it was, well, I'll let you be the judge for yourself. I'm trying not to be a very political podcast because everybody has their own views, and I don't want to get into arguments with people. But on the other hand, she is quite strong.
Well, and it's very inspiring, just in the current climate with Black Lives Matter and the going-ons with the Indigenous discoveries of the.
And she really felt that she could do nothing but speak up because of the way that things were going, and she felt that was her responsibility ethically and legally to speak up. It was quite...
Not in a political way. I just think it's really much a call to everybody to be an ally if you're not Indigenous, and to really...
Yes, that the piece, there's so much education in that book about what it is really like to be an Indigenous person in Canada and what the government has or has not done to support that group of people. And I mean, I can't say anything about it because I'm not, but it's a very powerful book, and I would highly encourage the listening part of it.
Yes, absolutely.
That would be it. The podcast recommendation for this week, month, whatever time, is called The Sporkful, and it's a podcast for people who love to eat and talk about the wonderful world of food. It's a James Beard, who I don't know who he is, award-winning podcast featuring interviews with food celebrities, discussions on important issues like whether a hot dog's a sandwich, and a lot more. So that's The Sporkful.
That sounds like a good podcast.
And then the question is, are you starting to make plans for your Christmas gifts yet? Because I am.
Actually,
I'm making lists of things that need to be made and done and whatever.
I can't say anything more, but yes, there's plans.
So anyway, that's kind of the questions. And anyway, so right into this topic. And you said you've been very busy differentiating for your students at Niagara College.
That's right.
You haven't really had a chance to look over this, but I'm sure as a teacher, I know in a different context, but as a teacher yourself, you're going to have things to add. And
there might be a lot of non-teacher listeners. So what is
no? This is for parents. I'm telling you what it is. Differentiation in the classroom. You're going to define
differentiation.
Yes, it's designing your lessons based on students' learning styles. So it's being aware of all the different kinds of learners that you have in your classroom and giving, like, obviously you can't design 20 lessons based on, but there are different learning styles: kinesthetic, hands-on, listening, people who learn by listening, people who learn by writing, people who learn by seeing, people who, like, there's all that. So when you're thinking about your lesson, I know that a lot of times in my class I would actually do some kind of a learning styles survey or something, so I knew what the real strengths of some of my learners were, and I thought about that when I designed my lessons. So that's part.
Like, I always think of it as not teaching to the middle average.
Well, in the definition that I put up actually on the not on Facebook today.
Oh yeah, okay.
Like, find it, because that really is an important one. If you didn't see it on Facebook, it's Carol Ann Tomlinson, who is a very, very strong differentiator of learning, but it's
differentiation is simply a teacher attending to the learning needs of a particular student or small groups of students, rather than teaching a class as though all individuals in it were basically alike.
Right. Yeah. So a lot of times you'll hear that teachers teach to the middle. So they don't teach to the low end.
The stronger kids are bored and the lower kids are lost.
Mm-hmm. So that's what we're trying not to do. Differentiation is about grouping of students, and I'm sure you do that all the time. Yep. You might group students by a shared interest topic or by ability, or just for a certain assignment. You might make a group of students. That's differentiating. And changing groups around so that I used to try not to do ability grouping all the time. Sometimes it was good for kids to be, but other times you need to put, like,
I remember grade 1, I was in the Orioles, and there were robins and blue jays and finches and other groups, but we all
don't do that anymore. Yeah.
We all knew which group was the low group.
Right, and I think that's bad. And I also think that you have to know that your child, who may be brilliant at writing, may also struggle in a different area. So that's what I always tried to help my kids understand, that some kids are really good at certain things and some kids are not so good. The kid that struggles in math might be amazing in gym and might be a real leader. So you just have to really, so it's grouping of students, and it's assessing students' learning using formative assessment so that you know where kids are at. And it's managing the classroom to create a safe and supportive environment, so that when I had teachers bring their kids to in-school team, which is where we talked about issues and tried to solve and come up with strategies for kids, and they would say that their behavior was bad, I would always say, well, are they struggling with their academic load? Because it's the tail that wags the dog, right? If it's too hard, I behave badly because I'm trying to save face. I'm behaving badly. It's too hard. Like, right. It's just...
And for the strong kids, sometimes behaving badly is I'm bored and nobody's doing anything for me, and so I'm just going to act out.
Yeah, and differentiation really is about continually assessing and adjusting lessons to meet student needs. So it's not the idea that, okay, we all turn to page 10 in the textbook. I taught that. I hope you got it, because I'm moving on to page 11 in the textbook. And that is not differentiation.
And you might remember experiencing that in school from certain teachers.
And then it's a teacher who is differentiating is factoring in learning styles and levels of readiness first before designing a lesson plan meeting the needs and benefiting a wide range of students. So
you're saying the plan has to be made first to think of the whole group,
right,
rather than at the spur of the moment. Oh, let's do this to address this.
No, and I mean, the other thing is, and I think I get into this later on, but you actually have to be constantly assessing your students, not in a formal pencil paper way, but in an observational, anecdotal, that kind of a way, in order to make sure. And sometimes you use things like exit cards. I don't know if you use those in your... do. So that you can say...
At the moment, I have a digital one, but...
I had an objective for this lesson. Let's see how many kids got it. Okay, 10 out of 30 got it. Apparently, I need to do some more work. But I'm not going to make those 10 people who got it sit through it all again. I'm going to differentiate for them and give them it could be a parallel task or something else that, whatever. And then it may just require teaching the same material to all the students using a variety of instructional strategies. Or it may require the teacher to deliver lessons at a whole bunch of different levels. So it's a bunch of things. So there are actually 4 ways to differentiate. Mm-hmm. There's content, which means that the content is differentiated, so it's at different levels for different kids. Okay. So kids who are doing math, you're in a math class, and it's a grade 4 math class, but there's still some kids who have not reached grade 4 level, and so you are scaffolding those skills for them and not just expecting them to. So you might have some high flyers that are already ready for some grade 5 concepts, so that's how you're differentiating content.
But the struggling kids don't have to listen to the part of the lesson that the high flyers are moving along with.
Yeah. Okay. It's frustrating, actually, too. Mm-hmm. And then process is another way. So there's content, process, product, and learning environment. And those are the 4 ways that a teacher can differentiate in the classroom. So content, we know what that is. That's the actual curriculum being changed to meet the needs of the student. You might reach back or you might reach forward. Right. Doesn't matter. So if you're in grade 2, you might be reaching back to grade 1, or you might be reaching forward to grade 2 or 3 because you've learned things. It's like, and I'll give this example about kindergarten because it's the one that drove me crazy. Kids come in, some kids learn, have all their numbers and letters. They're good, got it. Some kids are reading books. So why is the kindergarten teacher sitting with all those kids on the carpet going, this is the letter A? They should be doing like some kind of science or reading or whatever. Mm-hmm. But none of that sit on the carpet. Though the kids in the group who still don't know their letters can have things directed at them to help them learn their letters. The kids that are already reading need opportunities to do research and like writing and all those kinds of things. So that's where I see, and it's true in every grade. There are non-readers, but I'll get into that later. So content, process, product, and learning environment. So process is what I was talking about before, where you're delivering using learning styles, visual, auditory, kinesthetic. And some students do not require the same amount of support from the teacher. So you're even offering support on an individual needs basis.
Right. Like so for some self-starters, you set them going and off they go, and others
with check-ins.
With check-ins,
but yes. Not the same as. And then that, when people say, well, I can't deal with like 20 kids all at once, how am I supposed to differentiate for them? Well, I'm going to tell you that in most classes, a good quarter of those kids are high flyers. So if you design self-directed learning tasks for them, especially in science, social studies, reading, writing, like even math.
Yeah, well, where they don't need to be taught.
And remember when I used to talk to you about having around the outside, well, I'll get into that in environment.
We keep getting to the other thing.
But product is the other, is how they show mastery of a concept. And this can be done in the way the child prefers. So auditory learners can give an oral report. Mm-hmm. There is nothing in the curriculum that says every child must do a book report on this certain book in order to pass grade 2.
Exactly.
Like you can have a movie, you can have
so just
art.
To get like an example I do in my classroom, some of my students want to do a poster talk, so they design a poster and stand beside it and talk to the class. Others make a PowerPoint presentation. Others write 5 or 6 paragraphs and don't talk at all to anybody in the class. It just depends on where they feel their strong suit is to show that what they've learned.
But they have to show what they know.
Yes.
But you also have to do it in a way.
But the product is different.
The product can be different. And I'm not saying that kids never need to write a test, but every kid should be allowed to write a test differently. Some kids need the test read to them. Some kids need the test read to them and be allowed to tape their answers or dictate their answers to someone. Like, there are no rules about this, and there are no rules in the curriculum about this. No. The only time when your kid actually needs an IEP where they are formalized is if you're reaching back more than 2 years in the curriculum. IEP is Individual Education Plan, which is called all kinds of different things in different countries and provinces. The learning environment is about groups and individuals and quiet places to learn and what's available to them. So when I had a classroom, I always had surrounding on the outside what I called challenges. And so kids could always know. And within the challenge, I had challenges that were okay for kids who were struggling right up to, if nobody, when you're done, you've just begun, because there's always a challenge in the classroom that you can try. There were some kids that were working on big individual projects that they would go to when their curriculum work was done. So that's so I wanted to talk about really some differentiated strategies for different subjects, which can apply sort of across the board, but I wanted to interrupt
you. So parents that are listening, what can they do with this information once they have it in hand, and yet they're not seeing
my way of helping parents to communicate with teachers is to ask questions. I'm noticing that my child is struggling. What is it that we can do? I'm noticing that my child is bored. How do we help? So it has to be done in you can't call them up and say, well, I want to see you provide my child with a choice board.
Right.
But by asking and talking and really not taking no for an answer. No, I think that my child needs something extra or something. Parents underestimate themselves, I think, in what they, and I think that 100% there's a real fear. And the number one fear about getting in touch and communicating with your teacher and maybe getting into a conversation that might be slightly like what you would consider pushy or starting to ask some questions is, what is that teacher going to do to my child based on me? And that should never be a consideration. If that teacher takes it out on your child, then you need to deal with that problem. Because that's a big problem. That's not professional. So anyway, I wanted to just go over like a few little differentiation strategies that, you can know about, and that, you could always direct the teacher to listen to this podcast.
There you go.
So a choice board is one of the coolest things, and I used to use this all the time. So you can have the opportunity to learn about, say, probability during doing a whole bunch of different things, playing a game with a peer, watching a video, reading a textbook, or working on problems on a worksheet. So you could say, all of these activities are available to you, so pick one. So it can be the same thing with culminating tasks on a choice board. So mini lessons are my big thing for differentiation. So you have done an exit card. You know that 10 kids didn't get it. So you sit down and do a mini lesson with those. You might do it in 2 groups, but you're going to do a mini lesson. And manipulatives, for sure, you should be seeing manipulatives in kids' classrooms for math. Yeah, these are about math. Students who've already mastered something can actually create activities for kids who haven't mastered it yet.
Right.
They can create problems or activities or whatever. And for students who have already mastered something, they can be given the opportunity to explain their answer to somebody else. I'm not talking about another student. I'm talking about, I loved this as a principal, when a kid would arrive at the door with their manipulatives and their math problem and say, can I explain to you how I did this?
Wow. Awesome.
And that would, right?
Mm-hmm.
Or have math buddies with another class and get kids going, like grade 3 kids going out to grade 8 kids and solving a problem together and figuring something out that's maybe obviously lower than the grade 8 but more advanced than the grade 3. So math buddies is a great thing. So how about science? Here's a few suggestions for science. Help stations where peers assist each other with experiments or things that they're doing in science. So setting up a question and answer session in science, right? Where I have done that to kick off a unit. Let's ask let's put all our questions about outer space up on the board, and then we can go through the unit, and when we find the answer to that question, we can put it up there. A word wall of all the words and vocabulary that we're using in that unit.
Mm-hmm.
And kids can create that kind of a visual word wall. And so it challenges the kids that are not struggling as much, where science is their thing, to come up with the symbols to go with the words or the words themselves. And for the kids who do struggle, then they have all the vocabulary, which we know that vocabulary is the key, right? That's particularly interest centers. I mean, I'll go back to saying that it was a sad day when centers left primary.
I know.
And when we worked on themes and did all that. But there might be an excavation center, a reading center, a dinosaur art project center, something that focuses on anatomy, a video center, so all these different activities. And then it says as well, this is where your content learning should take on various formats. Some oral, some pictures, some this, fill in the blank things, but all that sort of thing. And here's your specialty, ELL learners.
Yes, absolutely.
So you can see if you agree or disagree with any of these. All teachers need to become language teachers so that the content they are teaching the classroom can be conveyed to the students whose first language is not English.
Yeah, that's a big deal. I mean, those of us that work in ESL classrooms with a homogenous group of ESL children, I mean, homogenous, I shouldn't even say that. But anyways, similar level kids, or if they're in the age-appropriate grade, I taught in the high school once where the history teacher said, okay, you fix these kids and you teach them what they need to know so that they can come to my history class and do history with the rest of us. And no, if you're teaching a content area and you have ELL children in your classroom, you have to teach them language as well as teach the content to the whole class. And it works in centers.
And I think one of the things they say here is that it's okay for them to read some things in their own language.
Oh, absolutely. Some people get
some things.
Some people
right?
get all bent out of shape about making it English only, and they punish children for not speaking English only, and yet literacy skills are transferable. So if a child goes home and reads a journal, or maybe he's just made a picture journal, but then describes the pictures to his family in his first language, and then comes back to school and does it the best he can with English, with the teacher providing a lot of things, and then the child goes back home and does it in English for his parents. it's celebrating the bilingual brain, and it's a huge success and very important.
Right. And then basically while that is happening, while you're rewarding the child for those kinds of successes, you're also doing a lot of activities where you're building vocabulary. Because that's the main thing, right?
Yes.
Is the building of vocabulary and working in groups. They should be grouped with kids that are, English speakers as well, native speakers as well. So anyway, that's interesting. Differentiated instruction or strategies for reading, tiered assignments in reading to allow students to show that they have learned at a level that suits them. So reading groups can pick a book based on interest or be assigned it based on a reading level. Scaffolding instructions, giving clear explanations with visuals and flexible grouping. And I think the other thing we have to realize is that technology is available to read things to kids.
Yeah.
And that's okay, like totally okay, because it allows kids to be exposed to stuff that's beyond their reading level.
Absolutely.
But they can...
And their passive vocabulary will grow in leaps and bounds.
Like particularly once kids get past grade 3, in grade 4 and up, they need to be building vocabulary. So, and the same thing for writing. Definitely conferencing with kids. Like teachers should be conferencing with individuals and individual groups. So they might hand in a writing assignment and they say, all 7 of these kids are struggling with, the use of a comma or getting their ideas coherent. Like,
right. Or having characters in the stories that do something.
Right. But, so, you have those conferences with kids, but you also have to remember Google Read and Write, which is highly accessible to everyone, allows kids to read and write. Like Google Write is speaking, speech to text. So kids who are struggling, if you've got a kid with wonderful ideas that either has a working memory issue where writing is very difficult for kids with working memory.
No, because they can spill out the words talking, but they can't get it transferred to their fingers.
Technology is like crazy good. Also, I think assigned writing topics, I hope we're still not doing that in school. So kids should be able to write about their own small moments, special moments, whatever. Lucy Calkins is a great, if you want to read a little bit about.
And as they get older and they need to write about the content that they're learning about, it's still important that they get to choose what point of view they want to write about it. And, maybe they want to write a humorous piece about dinosaurs, or if they've been studying some scientific or physics thing, they can create,
writing is writing. Fiction, nonfiction, whatever. Nonfiction. And the same thing, reading is reading. If the kid reads a magazine or a newspaper or something off the internet, reading is reading. There's 2 things that I feel are highly important. One thing is like a writing folder where you keep writing samples so you can see a progression of ability across a year. I think that's really important.
And it's important for the teacher to keep it, not for it to become bunched up papers in the backpack.
Yeah. We really need to keep citing, keep samples so that you can really go back and see. And now, like with blogs and internet and stuff, all you have to do is take a picture, upload it into the kids' digital portfolio, and boom, you've got it. And the other one is graphic organizers, and there are a myriad of graphic organizers, and as long as you teach kids how to use them properly, like I would go into classrooms sometimes and the graphic organizer was so filled in that it was the story. So you have to teach kids about brevity and about planning ideas without writing the whole story on that, particularly in younger grades, right?
Absolutely.
So, but graphic organizers,
we use them a lot in English as a second language too.
So, and then there's special education, which was kind of my specialty, and a lot of them are the same. I don't think that the strategies for differentiation for special ed are that much different than any other, the multisensory, the flexible grouping, assistive technology. Like, there's just all these things, explicit modeling. Like, how many times have I walked into a classroom and it's like or had a teacher come to me and say, oh, these kids, like, they can't write a paragraph. Well, did you explicitly show them how to write a paragraph? Like, explicitly.
Mm-hmm.
And go through it step by step. Because, I don't know, it's the same thing as when we talk about organizational skills, right? Like, you have to show them and explicitly show them, okay, this is how we put everything into our desk. This is how we return the crayons and the scissors to the shelf, because if you don't, they will just throw them on the shelf or throw them in their desks, and then you're digging through.
Well, and modeling writing, for example, it's on the fly, spontaneously asking students to suggest a topic, and then you start writing about it, and you stop and you say, okay, I'm thinking about this, but I also am thinking about this, and I have to choose which way I'm going to go. And you show them that as a writer, you have to make that choice. That it's not it's not like magical.
There was a comprehension resource a long time ago that I used quite regularly called Think Alouds, and it basically took you through comprehension and said for you what might be going on in someone's head.
Mm-hmm.
And so, that's metacognition, right? Yep. So anyway, and how do teachers know what to do? And how do you find out how to differentiate for a child? And this is where the diagnostic, the assessment as learning. So while they're learning, you're watching them. For learning, which is to see what they need to know next. And the as learning is the teacher walking around going, oh my gosh, this group is struggling like crazy. Come here, little group. Let me help you figure out why you're stuck.
Mm-hmm.
So it's getting kids unstuck in the moment. That's the as learning part. The for learning is what you do with an exit card or looking at a little assessment that you did at the end of a class so that you know what to do tomorrow. Mm-hmm. And then the of is the
assessment of learning is at the end.
Is the culminating task kind of a thing. Exit cards and interviews and conferences, that's how teachers learn how to differentiate. And work samples and culminating tasks. And time and technology. Like, there's just all these tools that they have to find out how to differentiate for your kid. But it is okay to say to a teacher, have you done a diagnostic on my child? Do you know what their reading level is? Do you know where you're going with them? What you're about to do?
Do you know what gaps there are in math?
Do you know how my kid responds to writing tasks in class? Do they lose their pencil or break their pencil and do nothing?
Or are they
maybe
totally
we need
writing like crazy?
So do we need to look for another way for them to write? Like, draw your picture first. And that used to drive me crazy because I had grade 1 teachers that would say, no, they have to draw their picture second. Well, no, some kids actually need to draw the picture and then write about it.
Mm-hmm.
Like, I'm sure if you talk to children's book authors, they might say that. I drew all the illustrations and then I talked about them.
Yep.
So, and finally, I wanted to talk about the individual education plan, which is the plan that is put in place through a committee with you present as a parent. Do not give away your legal right to be part of the individual education plan committee. I don't care where you live. You have a right to be a part of that. And that should not be a phone call where they say, oh, the mid-year assessment is coming up, so we want to put your kid on an individual education plan to make sure they do well on it.
Yeah, no.
That's totally...
It's a legal contract. It's binding, and you need to be present for it.
So there can be an accommodations plan that is not like it is still an individual education plan, but it is not altering the content of your child's education. So in order for them to put you on like an formal like a an individual education plan where they're reaching back, your kid should be in grade 3 working at the beginning of grade 1.
I'm confused. Say that again.
So
if you have
they're
an
going
individual
to,
education plan?
like they're going to say to you, we're going to put your kid on an education plan where they are no longer at the grade level.
Oh, okay.
Right?
That's okay.
Yeah, where the program is altered.
Right. So then they're not doing the same curriculum as their cohort.
They're not doing the same curriculum as their cohort. And the problem is, once they get to high school, and even once they get to grade 7, 8, and so this is where I encourage, like, you can still do some of there's 2 ways to do it. You can reach back and do a whole different curriculum, completely modified. My kid's in grade 3, but they're working at the beginning of grade 1. My kid's in grade 6, but they're still working at the end of grade 3. Like, it's got to be a pretty dramatic proof kind of a thing.
Right.
But they can also modify it by just cutting back on the number of expectations that they are actually evaluating your child.
So they're covering the same content, but
right. So in history, there's 8 objectives or whatever, learning outcomes that are required for this unit. So instead of giving your kid something like from grade 4 history, which makes no sense, just cut back and your kid can deal with 4 of those 8 expectations. And I guarantee that by the time they get to grade 9, it will not make any difference. No. So, and the same thing in grade 4.
If anything, they'll have more confidence and not be so beaten.
And so even if in language they are really modified, like in language they are still working on learning the words from grade 1 or 2 and they're in grade 3 or 4, fine, do that in language, but there's no reason why they can't hear the same content in social studies and science and art. None of those things have to be modified. No. And even in math, you can be careful about that. I mean, there's certain things, if they're not counting and they're not, so just make sure that they're really reaching back a long way before they put your kid on a modified program that has them sitting in a grade 4 class working on grade 1 stuff. Right. Because it's not always necessary. And it's written and prepared by you as a parent, the teacher, and usually a learning resource teacher. Yeah. But you have to read that thing and you have to go get a friend who's a teacher or someone that you trust to go over it with you and take it back in and make suggestions. And it's called a working document for a reason. It shouldn't be made in September and then updated in, February and then not...
Or how about October 2 years later?
No, it should be a working document changing as your child changes, which we all know that kids change pretty quickly. And you have to sign it, and you should be invited to a meeting to discuss it. And you should go. And who's responsible for it is usually the classroom teacher, almost 100%. And the learning resource teacher may either come into the classroom or withdraw your child for certain things. But make sure you know what the learning resource teacher is doing with your child and what objectives or learning outcomes they're dealing with, because they should be doing some specific things to help your kid get caught up. Like, unless, and I know there's things like learning disabilities and all sorts of things, but that's, those are formal identifications, and those happen sometimes through assessments. But those should be 8 to 10% of the population. So most for most people, and how are you should be updated every time there's like a major change in something. And if you haven't heard from your child's teacher about how things are going on the IEP after like 3-4 weeks, you should be calling and saying, can you just update me? Where are we at? We were working on these goals. How are they helpful? So, I mean, this is not a passive document. If a teacher decides that it's important, then it should be something that is part of your discussion on a regular basis, and it is your right to have that information. And I just said formal and informal. So the only way that you get a formal individual education plan is if your child is identified with something. And I think most people can look up on ministry websites the different identifications. They do change because of research and stuff that they have, but your kid can be but they would be formally identified, and nobody can get formally identified without the parent sitting in the room, because it's called an identification, placement, and review. Like you can't.
So if you get a call saying, "Oh, I think your child has ADHD," you can't take that at face value at all.
I always said to my teachers, "Doc, you're not a doctor," and so
teachers like to
well, maybe you should consider
diagnose.
Maybe you should consider taking your child to the doctor and talking about medication.
No, that's not a teacher's
When do you
place.
go to let's consider this as an adult human being.
Yes.
When do you go to the doctor and say, well, I really think maybe I'd like to have some heart medication? Like, no, you talk about what your symptoms are, and the doctor might say, well, we're going to put you on a diet, we're going to do this, we're going to do that, we're going to make sure that everything works properly. Like for kids, their eyes, their ears, their nose, eyes, ears, nose, and throat.
Mm-hmm.
That, like, because that's allergies and all kinds of stuff that impacts,
learning,
how they learn.
Yep.
So they don't just go, oh, let's just see if you fidget in your chair so we can identify you as ADHD. That should be a long process to get to that point. So not a fan. So informal, though, there can be an informal individual education plan without an identification.
Yes.
But just be wary and don't just jump into that. Get some advice, and you can actually call the Ministry of Education. You can call me, because you have to be like, I took kids off IEPs like crazy because it made no sense. We were just on them for, I don't even know why sometimes, because
well, you inherited those kinds
yes,
of
I
cases.
did, a lot of them. And so, and the other one I just wanted to touch on was, when do you get an EA, and what's the purpose of having an EA?
EA is an educational assistant in Ontario, but other provinces or
and even countries have other names for them, but basically they're assigned as an aid to your child. And in Ontario, it's basically based on physical or behavior needs. So the child cannot function safely in the school environment without somebody to help them out. And the purpose of an EA is to build strategies that actually make your child as independent as possible. So I was kind of a mean principal, because I moved EAs around a lot so that kids didn't get attached like Velcro to the hip of a child.
They're not supposed to be a nanny.
No. And you should be saying, please change up my kid's EA, because I don't want them just depending. I mean, I watched EAs tie shoes and do things that they should never have been doing for a child, that the child was fully capable of doing on their own. And the EA is not responsible for the child's academic programming. The teacher is responsible. So just keep that in mind, because a lot of teachers are happy to slough off whatever your child's academic program is onto the EA. And that does not mean that they can't help them, review letters or numbers and do stuff with them. But that is not their job. Their job is to help your child build strategies to be independent in society. So that's my little 2 cents. So that's my 2 cents about differentiation. But It's basically about the teacher knowing your child and creating a program that meets that child's needs, whether that would be in small groups or sometimes pulled aside individually or off on their own doing something. But it is about teachers being completely responsible for knowing who your child is and doing appropriate things in the classroom to help them be successful.
Absolutely.
So my October 15th is going to be strategies that build community in schools and what should all schools promote.
That sounds exciting.
So that'll be kind of fun. But please, as always, you can always contact us at noroom4phonies.com. Or I'm sorry, at gmail.com. And then there's the website, which you can get in touch with us there. Facebook, Instagram, Twitter. There's all kinds of places where you can reach us. But my main piece of advice for parents is pay attention to your child's education and don't be afraid to ask questions. So thank you for joining us here at No Room for Phonies, the pathway to differentiation for everybody.